Hi, in today's video I'm going to show you how to install rootless podman on nixos using the ZFS file system. Now this is the nixos wiki page about podman, and it's actually quite short, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is actually take you through the steps of getting podman set up. So as you can see, I have podman here installed. I also have podman compose, and I have CRX-ng running in a podman container. So what I'm going to do is take you through the steps to get this set up. And as I said, what we'll be doing is we're going to be doing this on a nixos setup running the ZFS file system. So if you're not running ZFS, you're going to need to make a few changes to this tutorial. So what I'm going to do is actually take you through the setup. So first of all, what we need to do is create a containers data set. So we need to manually create the ZFS data set with the ACL type POSIX ACL property. And we do this from the command line. So this is the first step. We run doas ZFS create -o ACL type equals POSIX ACL zpool containers. And what this does is this creates a container with this special ACL type, which is needed for podman to run. So that's the first step. We create the container. The next step after that is we actually need to set the mount point for the container we have just created. So we do that with doas ZFS set mount point equals var lib containers storage zpool containers. Now, if I run ZFS list, what you will see here is the container that we created. The main pool is called zpool, and we created the dataset containers in that zpool, as you can see here. So after that, what we need to do is actually set up our configuration.nix with some options that will allow podman to use the container we've created, set up podman, and also add ourselves to the OCI group. Now this is a bit confusing because the wiki actually mentions you need to add yourself to the podman group, but this is an OCI container, so that's what we need to do. So as you can see here from my notes, rootless can't use ZFS directly. And what I mean by rootless is we're running podman without sudo or doas. So we're not running it as root, we're just running it as podman. So these are the notes on actually setting up the data set that we did in the previous step and mounting the data set to that directory. So what we need to do is actually go through and add these particular snippets of code into our configuration.nix. And this is just the snippets of code that we add. And then what I'm going to do is show you a full configuration.nix with all the options in place so it makes sense. So what we have here, first of all, is hardware NVIDIA container toolkit enable equals true. And what this does is this enables the NVIDIA container toolkit for podman images so that you have access to the GPU from the containers. What we next have here is virtualization containers enable equals true, and then the registries that we're actually going to search, so like docker.io, q.io, which are repositories from which you can actually pull podman and Docker images. Just get some tea there. Okay, so the next step is the storage settings. So what we have here is the storage. The driver is ZFS. We have a graph root and run root. So these are directories where podman will sort of will use basically to store stuff. The next section down here is podman enabled equals true. So enabling podman. And what we're doing is we also have this option called docker compat equals true. So this basically allows you to create a Docker alias for podman, I believe. Let me see. Docker? Yeah. So you can either use the podman command or Docker. And this is useful if you're actually just following along a new tutorial someone's written and everything's written for Docker. Now, this next section is essential. The default settings DNS enabled equals true. And this is required for containers using podman compose to be able to talk to each other. So this will enable the DNS so that it can actually use your system's network and actually access other containers, but also services running on your machine using things like Flakes or other services. Okay, next section, Podman ZFS. This is the file system part. And at first I thought that this would have to go into the hardware.configuration.nix, but it doesn't. It goes in the configuration.nix. And you can see here, file systems, var lib containers storage, device zpool containers, fs type, ZFS options, ZFS util. And this is the data set that we created in the previous step at the start of the tutorial on the command line. So this basically tells Podman to use that data set that we created for storage. What we have down here next is our username section. And as you can see here, is normal user, and this is the essential part, extra groups. So what we have here is wheel, network manager, audio, video, and OCI. Now, if you look at the tutorial here, it will actually mention that you've got to use Podman, but you don't. You've got to use OCI because it's an OCI container. So we add ourselves to the OCI group here, and that will allow us to basically use Podman without having to use root, sudo, doas, that sort of thing. The next section down here is the environment system packages. And this is where you install packages using configuration.nix. Now, I'm using Home Manager as well, standalone, but there are some applications that you actually want to install with configuration.nix for various reasons, so they actually work properly with stuff. So in this section down here, environmental system packages, we have Podman Compose, and this is used with compose.yaml files because there are two ways of using Podman or Docker. You can use it from the command line by running a long command, but what you can also do is create a compose.yaml file, which has a list of all the options you would use on the command line in a file. And the advantage of that is you can actually run podman compose up-d and podman compose down to bring the container up and down again. And what it will do is it'll actually replace previous containers that you've created. So you don't have to manually do it. You don't have to manually delete them, which you do if you use the command line. That's basically the gist of it. So what I'm going to do is come across here and actually show you a full configuration.nix file so you can actually see this in place. So this is my configuration.nix file for my Dell XPS 15 with an NVIDIA graphics card using the ZFS file system. So you may have noticed I'm running DWL here, which I believe I covered in a previous video, more T. So what I'm going to do is take you through the relevant bits of code and the changes that we've made. So first of all, we have config lib pkgs, and this section is for my DWL config. So I'll skip over that. So let in, and then we've got the imports, hardware configuration.nix, bootloader. We have ZFS settings here enabled. The important thing about ZFS is you've got an option called Systemd Services ZFS Mount Enable, and we set that to false. We've got the key map, we've got the networking, the time zone, Nix garbage, Nix flakes. So this is how you enable flakes in your configuration.nix, and I'm using a flake for my configuration.nix and hardware configuration.nix, as well as my home manager setup. We have the XDG portal, which is needed for things like OBS Studio, so that it can actually select windows and record them. We got even though I'm using Wayland, the service is actually called X Server. I've got the NVIDIA driver here set up, the key map. I actually have both GNOME and DWL set up on the same machine, so if needed, I can switch between them. This is the ZFS Auto Scrub. This is the section here for creating automatic snapshots of my home data set. So this will create ZFS snapshots every hour, which is really useful. And what you can actually do is it will actually automatically delete them after a certain period of time. But what you can also do is actually mount the data sets to recover data if you've actually deleted a file by accident. These are other options like firmald, printing false, libinput, which is for the touchpad. I've got pipewire, GNOME. Okay, so here's the hardware. So under hardware, what you want for NVIDIA is NVIDIA.open equals false. And what this means is it doesn't use the open source version of the NVIDIA driver because you want the proprietary version, which will allow you to use CUDA. So that's the NVIDIA section. We're getting through stuff. So, okay, here we go. Here's the settings for Podman. So the hardware NVIDIA container toolkit enabled equals true. And then, as I said, that will allow you to use the GPU from within containers, which is essential for some containers that I'll actually show you in a later video, such as OpenWebUI. So this is the virtualization section here. So we have the virtualization, containers enables equal true. The registries, as I said, Docker IO and QIO to pull images from. The storage settings. Remember, this is the data set that we created. So just to refresh your memory, we created the zpool containers data set with the ACL type POSIX ACL option, which is required for Podman. And then after we did that, we set a mount point to varlib container storage for that data set. And that corresponds to this section down here. We have the graph root and the run root. After that, we have the Podman block of code. So Podman enables true. Docker compatibility. So that means you have a Docker alias for Podman, so you can use the Docker command as well. Then again, we have the default network DNS enabled. So this will allow Podman compose containers to talk to each other, as well as to be able to reach services running on your system, such as Alarma, and any other services you've got set up. And these can be set up with flakes or system services. So this allows you to run Docker or Podman containers that can interact not only with other Podman containers, but also services running on your system. Then we have the Podman ZFS section here. So again, this is the file systems varlib container storage equals zpool containers, which is the container we created. The FS type is ZFS. The options are ZFS utils. And again, down here, what we have, which is vital, is the username block. And you can see in the extra groups here, we have added ourselves to the OCI group, which is the group needed for OCI containers, which is what Podman is. And then finally, what we have, if I come down past all this, okay, another thing to mention down here, important. Now, different containers can set up can be accessed on a port. So what you'll see here is I have CRXNG running. CRXNG is a local search engine that you can connect to things like Bing, Google, Start Page, DuckDuckGo, all that kind of stuff. And as you'll see down here, we're running on 127.0.01 8080. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because what you'll see here is network firewall allowed TCP ports. And you'll see I have 8080, which is for CRXNG, and 3000, which is for Open Web UI. Now, you actually need to open the ports in the firewall, even though you're actually just running it locally. So I'm not providing access to CRXNG over the internet or anything. It's just running locally, but you still need to have the port open for you to be able to access it. If you don't have the ports open, you won't be able to access the service running in the Podman container. So that's another important point, and that's something that had me stumped for a while. So the next step, again, hang on, Podman compose. Okay. So as I mentioned, what we have here is the environment system packages section, and this is the section in the configuration.nix where you can actually specify packages to be installed. As I said, I'm using Home Manager standalone, which I use to install all my user packages, but there are some packages that you actually want to install with configuration.nix so that they work properly with system level things like Podman. So what we have down here is podman-compose. So as you can see here, I have Podman, got Podman compose. We also have Docker, Podman. Okay. And so again, this is CRXNG running in a Podman container. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to get this set up in another video. Do a video on its own to get this set up. But this is really nice because, as I said, you got no crap like you would on Google. So nixos, say Podman. I have Google set up in Firefox, so it always uses the web search option as opposed to the all, which is the default, which can come up with loads of crap that you would normally sort of see. And then you've got the AI mode, of course, which will bring up all this stuff. Now, the nice thing about CRXNG, which, as I said, I'll show you in another video, is you have clean URLs here, and you can specify all these different tabs that come up. You also have the option to download a CSV file with all the links You have JSON enabled here, and this is required for using OpenWebUI, which I'll show you in another video. So I'll show you how to get OpenWebUI installed and working with CRXNG as well. And we have pagination down here. So we've got sort of pagination. Whereas, for example, if you go to duckduckgo.com and I search for nixos podman, DuckDuckGo doesn't have pagination, it just has more results. But what I'm using, you can see I've got DuckDuckGo, Brave and Bing results here. So we have the DuckDuckGo results with pagination. And, we've got image tab here. So if I click images, give it a second. Now, the nice thing about the images on CRXNG is you get direct links. So you can see here, I actually have direct links. So if I click on that, it gives me the direct link to the actual image. We've got videos, news, files, maps, social media. I'll take you through that in another video. So that's how you get Podman set up on nixos running rootlessly on a ZFS file system. And as said, the nixos wiki is a bit sparse on these types of things. You can see we've got a basic setup here. Okay, and so you can see the ZFS root, the ZFS note here. Rootless can't use ZFS directly, but the overlay needs POSIX ACL and then best amount of data set with the property ACL, POSIX ACL, which is great. It tells you kind of roughly what you need to do, but it doesn't actually provide an example. So I'll put links to all this under the video. This is the document here. And as you'll see, I have notes on CRXNG and OpenWebUI that I'll show you in another video. And that's all for now.